Yo, what is going on, guys? You got your boy AARON2for20, bringing you guys the WBE trades and transactions for the final week of trades and transactions going into week 7. Now, we have a lot of transactions this week. That's to be expected. For anyone who's unaware, usually at the end of transactions, there are a lot more of them because people are rushing to get them in before playoffs. They have as much of an idea of what would work for the team as possible based on what was dropped, and they've clearly had a few weeks to experiment with the team, see what worked and what didn't work. So usually a lot of transactions happen these weeks, and there are definitely a lot of them. So hopefully your favorite coaches made some transactions if you wanted them to, and if they didn't, then they didn't, and it's too late now. But yeah, make sure you guys leave a like if you enjoy, and comment down below what transactions you would have made for whoever your favorite coach is, or even just what transactions you liked versus which ones you didn't. Whatever you feel like commenting, it will always be appreciated. So first up, a newcomer to not only the WBE, but also to trades and transactions, we have Cybertron, aka Aaron, dropping a low Marowak for Blissey and Lycanroc midday for Aromatisse. So I actually didn't really realize this until someone pointed it out to me, but apparently Aaron's team had such a low SPDF stat. It was around somewhere, I forget exactly what it was, but it was somewhere around like 60 to 80 for the average SPDF stat. So that's obviously abysmal for a draft. But Blissey clearly does patch that up really well. It's one of the best SPDF mons in the game. And Aromatisse, of course, is a nice backup option of that for tier 4. Will help a lot with SPDF as well, especially if there's a matchup that Blissey can't come to, as Blissey's a little bit passive. So having a nice backup Wishmon that can actually be offensive is a nice touch for Aaron's team as well. Blissey Mega Slowbro is a pretty disgusting defensive core to break. I can't think of mons that would necessarily break both, because of not only how Fizz-Def Mega Slowbro is, but also how SPDF Blissey is, and the fact that if either needed to ever pivot out, they both can clearly recover themselves up, but Blissey could always just Cleric from Mega Slowbro, so it doesn't necessarily need to run a rest set to get around status. And not only that, but he has a backup Cleric and Aromatisse too, because as I mentioned, there are some matchups that Blissey can just not come to due to the physical offense. So, already on top of that, Aaron's team is just a lot more reliable. He does still have some nice hazard options on his team, thankfully. So that won't necessarily hurt Aaron in dropping a low in Marowak plus the Lycanroc this week. As in terms of other hazard mons on Aaron's roster, you can see he has the Mamoswine, which is extremely reliable, Miltank, which is a great hazard mon. Blissey is also a really good rocker, actually, and it can comfortably fit rocks on in most matchups, I would say. And Azelgor, of course, is nice for spikes. So Aaron's team losing these two good hazard mons isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. In terms of just the fat on Aaron's roster, he somehow found a way to make it more fat. So I'm expecting a lot of timer games from here on out from Aaron. Overall, I think that his team is actually pretty solid in terms of a really bulky offense team, or just a semi-stall team even, if that's what he's going for. In terms of if Aaron just wanted to play HO, I mean, his offense is very selective at this point, and it's pretty physically based, but he can still make it work. And even on the special side, he does have special options. They're just a lot worse compared to the physical offense between Mamoswine, Kartana, and Kelder. His special offense is Rotom Heat, Aromatisse, and Guzzlord. Oh, and I guess Mega Slowbro too counts. But comparatively, it never could compete. But he does still have some nice special offense if he needs to. And his mons are so defensive that he could just run offensive investment most week anyway. Like, Aromatisse doesn't usually need a lot of defensive investment. Mega Slowbro almost would never need defensive investment. It's going to take it so well on the physical end. And Blissey can counteract by walling things so well on the special end that in most matchups, Aaron can just run an offensive Mega Slowbro and it can carry for him. So, I really like Aaron's transactions this week. I think they will put in a ton of work for him the rest of this season, and I look forward to seeing what he does. So next up, we have Patters, coach of the Newcastle Nidoking, and he is dropping Typhlosion and Swoobat for Delphox and Xatu this week. Personally, I'm a big fan of these transactions for Patters' team for a couple of reasons. For one, this gives him a really nice hazard deterrent, as his removal wasn't the greatest beforehand. It's reliant on Coco, for example. And while Coco isn't a bad removal option, I'm personally a big fan of Defog Coco myself. It's not the best to have to rely on that. I'm not even sure if Swoobat gets Defog, I'm going to be honest, but I know that Swoobat's a mon that can almost never really come to a matchup comfortably. I'm not even sure if Patters brought it to a game, if I'm being honest, because it's just a forgettable mon, and if I'm going to run a Psychic Flying type, I'd much rather be running Xatu or even Woobat, because at least with the Violet, it's really defensive, and Unaware is also really nice on that. But in general, though, Swoobat just feels so inferior to both, in my opinion. But Xatu especially is really nice because of Magic Bounce, which is great because you don't have to worry about status. And it helps a lot with his defensive core between having the options now to run Gluttony Snorlax a lot more comfortably because of the Magic Bounce. And also Hippowdon not needing to worry about getting Toxic. That's just really nice for Xatu in terms of supporting this roster. He does have more options to get rid of hazards, as mentioned before already. And Delphox is really nice for the speed tier, actually. A really nice fire type that can outpace mons just Garchomp or Thundurus that are really threatening mons that just outpace the base 100 speed tier. That gives Delphox a lot more use over Typhlosion already. And it has just much better offensiveness and coverage as well, to where Delphox is just a lot better of a fit for Patter's team. When his only special offense beforehand was, besides Typhlosion, it was really just Venomoth and Koko. And obviously those are both really good offensive mons. The next step below that would be Alolan Eggy, and Alolan Eggy isn't a mon that could really comfortably come to a lot of games. As we've seen, it only has come to one game for Patters. So in general, I like these transactions a lot. I think it gives Patters two really usable Pokemon, and versus having a mon that's kind of usable and a mon that will come to maybe one game in the season. So in general, I like that a lot. Next up, we have Automatic Coach of the... it's something NUZLEAFS. I tried pronouncing it last week. I'm sure I butchered it. I'm not going to butcher it again. So he's trading Scizor to Steve, coach of the Milwaukee Sawsbucks, for his Clefable. And then Otto is also going to be dropping Granbull for Yanmega. So in terms of the Scizor for Clefable trade, I really like this a lot on both ends, actually, because not only for Steve's team, which I'm going to go over first just so I can go over Otto's transactions more in depth with all of them, I like the idea of having Scizor on this roster a lot, because Scizor can benefit from having Rain Up, of course, having his only weakness helped, and not only that, but Heatmore can also assist in having the Flash Fire immunity. So in general, that helps a lot with defensive synergy for Scizor. Gives Patters some nice priority options, as his only priority beforehand was Aqua Jet, Quillfish, and I guess Aqua Jet Armaldo too. But neither of those mons really need to even run priority, just because of the fact that they're Swiftwind mons. So having an option for priority that can reliably fit in on a moveset without needing to worry about just a fat priority option, I guess, that doesn't need to necessarily worry about like Rain being up to just help with speed. Scizor with Bullet Punch is really great. It also will help a lot with grass types. And that is something that, in my opinion, Steve's roster really struggled with, as his only options around grasses were Armaldo, Quillfish, and Heatmore. And in my opinion, if I was running a good grass type, I would never be afraid of any of those Pokemon. Because at the very least, Armaldo is not necessarily a good grass switch, and it's a neutral grass switch at that. And obviously a lot of grass switches do get coverage for Armaldo, so I wouldn't necessarily be worried. Things like Kartana could obviously just go for Spark Strike, and that's a really threatening grass at that, especially for Rain, so I would definitely not want that being my switch-in. Quillfish is an okay switch-in. It can definitely at least fire off a good poison hit, and it's nice for that regard. But again, no real recovery, so that does hurt. And that's the issue, is especially with also Heatmore, which is Hazard Weak, his grass checks all can get worn down pretty easily by hazards, whether it's rocks or spikes. Whereas Scizor also gives him another defog option, which beforehand, his only removal was Armaldo with Rapid Spin and Thundurus with defog. And while Armaldo is an okay option with Rapid Spin, it's not a mon that can really come to every game. And Thundurus, while it can come to a lot of games, doesn't necessarily have the moveset to always want to run defog. So I think having Scizor defog, that's a really reliable defogger for Steve as well. So I think that'll be great for Steve's roster. And as I mentioned, this trade benefited both sides as well, because for Otto, at the very least, with the NIJMEGEN NUZLEAFS, again, I think I butchered that, but having a very type of this team to pair with Latios is really, really nice. And he already had the steal with Cobalion, which helps Otto's roster a lot. As I mentioned before, his special offense was really good, and this at least, while it does lose Scizor as the physical offense, does give him a nice wall, which he really lacked outside of Slowbro, in my opinion, because his walls beforehand were both Violet-dependent Tier 5 niche matchup mons, such as Tangela and Vullaby. So having a nice backup wall with Slowbro is really nice, because if he's not going to get more physical offense, at the very least he's going to have another mon to just sit in front of mons, so he can maybe just outstall mons that he would otherwise need to break physically, which does help his roster, of course. He now also has a reliable Cleric, which is great if he's going to bring Vullaby to a matchup. He's not going to want that thing getting toxic, because otherwise it's pretty useless. Not only that, but it helps with Tangela for similar reasons. So I think that's great. Not only that, but it helps with just in general the setup options versus Otto's team, because Unaware Clefable is phenomenal against any setup sweeper for the most part. Unless if it's like, let's say, an SD Scizor, which even then, Clefable can just run Berry plus Flamethrower, and bam, Scizzor's now countered. So the Scizor that he just gave away is not exactly going to be that big of a threat, assuming that he did play Steve, whether it was in main season, which he does actually in week 10, or even in a potential playoffs, because who knows, Steve can maybe get into playoffs. I mean, he's 2-4 right now, same as Otto, so it's not exactly impossible for either team to make playoffs. I think in general, the Clefable also synergizes a lot better with Otto's team, because his rockers beforehand were Cobalion and Mega Camerupt. And while Mega Camerupt can fit rocks pretty freely, it's not a mon that can come to every game, nor is it a mon you want to bring to every game. And Cobalion as a reliable rocker is a stretch to say the least, because while it can definitely fit rocks, it takes away from potential sets with like SD rock polish, because if you're running rocks on that as well, you're going for one coverage option, and that's not reliable at all. And also, if you're going to force Cobalion to run rocks, it takes away from the physical offense that Otto's team has, because otherwise he has no physical offense outside of Mega Camerupt, and Mega Camerupt is not a physical mon. Its fire physical move is Flame Charge. So I'm actually really glad that Otto did this, because despite dropping a really good physical mon, he at the very least gets a reliable rocker to dedicate Cobalion to that physical mon. And in my opinion, on Otto's roster anyway, Scizor is better left as a defensive option regardless. So at the very least, he can focus Cobalion as the offensive steal that it should be on this roster. So I think that at the very least, that's nice. And not only that, but dropping Granbull for Yanmega, at the very least, again, just gives a really nice breaker, and also gives him some really nice speed option as well. Because while Otto's team has a couple of really great Scarfers in Cobalion plus Latios, I feel like at the very least, Cobalion can't really run a Scarf for this team, because as I mentioned, this does need physical offense, and he needs to dedicate Cobalion to that physical offense. So at this point, at least Yanmega can maybe just give a nice fast option through Speed Boost, which is really great for Otto's team. Not only that, but the coverage that Yanmega gives is just really nice. Between Dual Stab, it also gets Ancient Power for opposing mons, like let's say Fire types that might want to switch in on bug moves. Or just in general, Fire types that would threaten it out in general. And also his Specs Yanmega is actually really threatening as well. Tinted Lens is phenomenal for getting around switch-ins to bug flying, which there are a fair amount of them to be fair. A Tinted Lens helps just destroy mons like that. So in general, Yanmega I think is a great pickup for Otto's team. It at least helps Otto with special breakers, so maybe he could just overwhelm a team with so much special offense that the special walls won't be able to pressure. And he has a lot of diversity in special offense, to be fair. So at this point, maybe he could just overwhelm any special wall. Who knows? I personally think that Otto's team at least improved from this, despite having dropped a good physical breaker in Scizor. But as I mentioned before, it's really just outclassed in the physical steal department by Cobalion, at least on this specific team. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Next up, we have Kelly, coach of the Maryland Terrapins. He's dropping Arbok for Scyther. And all I can say to this is I am disappointed that Kelly is dropping a Snake for Scyther. At the very least, though, he did pick up Scyther, and I'm personally a big fan of Scyther. I've actually been seeing a lot of use from it for one of my good pals recently, and it's a really underrated mod. A Scyther, it's a really great speed tier with base 105, which is actually really important for Kelly's team, because his gap right now, before he dropped Arbok, which is pretty slow, to be honest, was between Zygarde and Serperior. Well, actually, Zygarde and Alolan Raichu. I take that back. I forgot Kelly had Alolan Raichu. But Scyther is just a really nice mon in general, though, even then, because the physical offensive mon that doesn't even really need investment. Because 110 physical attack plus Technician goes a long way with things such as Bug Bite and Aerial Ace being really reliable options for this mon. Not only that, but with the Violet, this thing can actually take hits really well. For example, I was running Calyx the other day, and even with just a Violate max HP, this thing can take hits pretty comfortably from a Mega Zam. And I know it's a random mod to throw out there, but just the fact that Mega Zam has such a filthy amount of special attack, it's base 175 to put into perspective. You wouldn't expect a mod to be barely able to get a roll to 2-hit KO versus a Scyther of all things, which doesn't have great bulk on its own. Without a Violet, it's 70-80 bulk in terms of HP plus Spadef. So the fact that it could take a Psychic from a Mega Zam so comfortably to where it's almost guaranteed able to live after rocks is pretty absurd, to be honest. So personally, I like the pickup a lot in terms of a serious perspective, but in terms of Kelly dropping the Snake for a non-Snake, it hurts a lot inside to see that. And Kelly, I'm really disappointed that you had to do that to your fans. I'm not sure how they're going to be able to manage, but it is what it is. You know, sometimes you have to make the tough sacrifices as WBE coach, and I guess that Kelly did that this week. So, next up, we have Leo, coach of Durham Dragons, who is trading away Dragonite plus Durant to Fanatax, coach of the Atlanta Umbreons, and he's in exchange getting Como and Sceptile. So, personally, we'll start again with Faint's roster. I like Dragonite on here a lot, as it's a really reliable physical offensive mon that doesn't even need setup. It can run a Bandit option pretty efficiently. And his next best physical offensive mon was like Regirock and Flygon. So while Como is obviously not a bad physical offensive mon, it's a nice just breaker to have Dragonite on Faint's roster instead. And personally, I like Dragonite just in general as a mon in general on Faint's roster with Mega Gardevoir more. It feels really nostalgic, I'm not gonna lie, with a nice ORS option. Because in ORS Dragonite Mega Gardevoir is really good in my opinion. in terms of just breaking through rosters. So in terms of the nostalgia aspect, I'm not going to lie, he has me there. But even then, like, Feint has really good options for removal to support Dragonite. Things such as Default Flygon, which is arguably the most lackluster by far of the options. But he also has Rapid Spin Fortress, which is pretty reliable. And also Default Torn Eye, which is actually a really, again, reliable removal option for Dragonite. So in my opinion, in that regard, it's actually really good. Not only that, but in terms of just the fighting type, it won't necessarily be missed on this team because he does still have plenty of options to clear steals from Mega Gardevoir. Between Banded Entei, which is phenomenal. Also, Flygon can possibly just run like a Z move set and break through a lot of steel types, which is great for Feint's roster, of course. So I don't think it'll necessarily be missed in that regard. Even then, Dragonite can just click Earthquake versus any steel type, and then bam, they're cleared for Mega Gardevoir. And in terms of the defensive aspect, you always switch in Lantern, which can just Scald Burn any steel type, and it can take hits pretty comfortably versus them as well. So I don't think that Feint's roster is necessarily missing Kommo-o, in my opinion. It does lose him on a rocker, sure, but again, in terms of rockers, he had Flygon, Fortress, and Regirock, all as reliable rock options. So I don't necessarily know what Kommo-o was offering to his team outside of maybe a Dragonitesmon, which in my opinion, Dragonite just does better anyway. Durant, I'm not a big fan of having 2 bug steel types, but hey, if that's what it needs to get to trade Dragonite, more power to Feint, of course. So, I mean, it is what it is, but I think that at least picking up Dragonite is worth this trade entirely. Now, in terms of Leo and the Durham Druddigons picking up Kommo-o and also Kommo-o and Sceptile, and also dropping Sceptile for Moltres and dropping Cryogonal for Tauros. So, as I mentioned already, I think Dragonite didn't necessarily fit Leo's roster the best. Kommo-o, though, is really nice. It's just a backup fighting type. It can be a nice special fighting type as well, which, in general, I think it's just a really nice option to have, as it can maybe make Megalop less reliant on running high jump kick in certain matchups, which is already a lot better. Fighting spam, in my opinion, especially with 2 very threatening fighting types, is a really good option. And Leo's team having this backup rocks option is really huge because his current rock options below were Cradily and Steelix, which are both really low tier mons. You don't want to necessarily be bringing them to every game. And even before drops, that was really his rock options. So having Kommo as an offensive rocker that can pressure teams a lot really well to where he could force out mons and maybe set up rocks in that option is really nice for Leo's team in general. Kommo is a really nice defensive option for Leo as well. Between that and things like Manaphy and Reuniclus and Muck, all those mons can sit versus a lot of teams and reliably still hit really hard, with Muck being arguably the weakest of them offensively. But even then, just Curse Muck can still pressure really well for Kommo-o, clearing a lot of bulky Psychics. So I think that having options such as Muck that can so reliably clear any Psychic for Kommo-o doesn't even matter that he has already a second fighting type of Megalop. And as I mentioned before, it can be a really nice special option as well, with especially the fact that it can be unlimited Z options. So Leo could maybe run like a Z Focus Blast if you didn't want to worry about a Focus Miss option, which helps a lot with diversity in Kommo-o as well, not having to worry about running physical just so you can hit your moves. In my opinion, I think it's going to be a really great option. Also, the Dragon not being 4 times weak to Ice, I think is really nice in general, whereas the 4 times weakness is with Fairy, and again, he has good Fairy options to kill things with like a Low Muck and Steelix. I think that'll be really nice. And even then, defensively, he has Moltres to switch in, now that he has, of course, picked up Moltres over Sceptile. So I think that Moltres in general is also a really good option for Leo's team, as his removal is really reliable, at least with Silvally as a good defogger. And even then, Moltres is a good spike removal option. I know a lot of people might be thinking to yourselves, defog Moltres, that's pretty bad idea, because, it's 4 times weak to rocks. But Moltres can actually pretty efficiently pressure spikers, which is great, because a lot of spike options, things like a Selgor and Fortress, are weak to fire types. And even on the non-bug end, things like, for example, Mega Glalie, which I know that wasn't drafted, but it's just the first spiker that came to mind that wasn't a bug type. But in general, a lot of spikers can be pressured pretty easily by Moltres, which is great. And also it can roost up, of course, and defensive Moltres on this team is actually really good. I think that Willow's support could be really nice, of course, to help just outstall things with, let's say, Reuniclus, which, again, helps a lot in terms of just defensiveness with this team. I'd argue that Leo could probably run a defensive team with almost any combination of mons besides Megalop and Tauros, and get by pretty well with just making whatever mons he doesn't run defensively offensive, besides, like, Silvally and Cradily, I would argue, and even to an extent, I guess, Steelix and Muck, but they could still at least function somewhat offensively. In general, I like these trades a lot. I think that they benefit both parties. And finally, we're going to get to Gator, coach of the Florida Gators. He's dropping Garbodor and Bouffalant for Frostlass plus Kangaskhan. So, already, I like this option a lot, actually, because even week 1, it was pretty apparent that GATRS team had a really big issue with dealing with offensive psychic types. Whereas now we have Frostless on the team, and Frostless at least is an okay option to getting around psychic types. It's better than what he had. Sadly, Gator does lose out on the poison immunity, but it's not the worst thing in the world, as Gator does have a really reliable remover in Donphan. Sadly, that and Arcapster is only removal options on the team, but even then, T-Spikes in general don't necessarily bother Gator's team. It's really just bad for Pikamuku, because between immunity on Heatran and also Natural Cure plus Heal Bell on Celebi, he has some decent ways to get around possible T-Spikes for his team. In terms of having Frostless on the team, it gives him a nice spice option over Garbodor, which, as I mentioned, at the very least, between the speed tier, which, while it does tie with Arcalps, is still a really important speed tier to have a base 110 mon. And also the fact that Frostless can also be a nice special option. While base 80 isn't exactly the best in general, the Ghost Ice typing offensively is really good. And the amount of types that hits really well is phenomenal. Especially the fact that this also helps with ground typing, which Gator's team outside of Celebi did struggle with a lot in terms of offensively handling it. Because his water types are Keldeo and Pikamuku. And while Keldeo can definitely offensively pressure ground types, it doesn't necessarily want to switch in on them. His only real switch in beforehand was Celebi. So at the very least, while Frostless is by no means a good ground switch in, it at the very least can pressure grounds enough to where it's one less mon that needs to worry about switching out versus them, which is great. Kangaskhan, in my opinion, that's just a better Bouffalon for Gator's team. It's by far a better offensive normal. Big out support is really appreciated, in my opinion, by Gator. And also, it's a really nice Wish option. A lot of people sleep on Wish Kangaskhan, but in my opinion, it's actually a really good option for Gator, because he can Wish up mons such as Heatran and get back sturdy on Donphan, even put Archeops back into range so it's out of Defeatus if he doesn't want to run a Citrus Berry. And also, getting HP back on Mega Heracross as well is actually really good, because Mega Heracross is such a fat biting type. You want to just be firing off hits as well as possible to break through teams, and having Wish Kangaskhan to support that is actually really important for Gator. And sadly, I mean, Bouffalon had to go. It was a really fun meme pick, in my opinion, for Gator's team, but I think Kangaskhan just supports the team far better. For a tier 5 mon, it's a mon that I think actually could come to a lot of matches in Gator's roster. I think Gator is someone who's capable of supporting a tier 5 mon and using a tier 5 mon to support his team really well. And it clearly shows, in my opinion, through just in general. Even week 1, when he brought Bouffalon, I think he supported it pretty well with running screens on his team. And I think that Gator can maybe use Kangaskhan the same way to maybe not necessarily be supportive, but more so support his roster. So I have faith in Gator as a player to utilize Kangaskhan to the fullest of its ability. I think that in terms of what it does for his roster, it's a great pickup. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he does the rest of the season. So with that, we are done with trades and transactions for the WBE Season 3. It has been your boy A around for 20, and I'm signing off. From this week forward, we will be taken over by Playoff Push, which will be analyzing potential playoff matchups and what teams need to do to get into playoff contention if they're not already there already, or what they need to do to stay in contention if they are in playoffs. So with that, I will see you guys next week with Playoff Push. Until then, peace out, guys.